Welcome to the IRS Debt and Audit Podcast with Brian Loughrin.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to an all-new episode of the IRS Debt and Audit Podcast with Brian Loughrin. I'm your host, Mike Leon. You know, Brian's a seasoned tax attorney based out in Tampa, Florida, and the founder of Tampa Tax Relief. He's got more than 25 years of experience helping individuals and business owners across the country resolve serious IRS problems, everything from audits to tax debts to even cases in the U.S. tax court. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about understanding those IRS notices and letters that come in the mail. Do not throw them away. That's my advice before we get it from a lawyer. Brian, it's good to see you as always. So let's dive into this because we talked about this off air. When someone receives an IRS notice, what does that usually mean about where their situation currently stands at present moment?
All right, thank you, Mike. It really depends on the notice. Now, for most people, if they know they have a tax debt issue or unfiled return issue, then they can pretty much assume that's some type of a collection letter or letter demanding a return. But for a lot of people that are caught off guard, sometimes these notices mean that there's a question about what's on a return. Maybe there's a missing schedule or document, or maybe there's even a mix-up on how much income was reported and so forth. So really, the thing to do is just open up the letter and take a quick look. Even if you know you have tax debt, that notice may not be pertaining to that particular tax debt. It may be pertaining to something else.
Brian, why do these notices, when they come in the mail, why do they feel confusing and intimidating to people, even though a lot of the times it's just simply informational?
Well, because these notices are sent in what I call government English. It's a variation of English, but it's government. And by that, what I mean is there's just certain phrases and internal types of terms that they use. And I will say the notices over the last 10 years have become a little more consumer friendly, if you will, but they're not going to read like a bank statement or a letter from a brokerage house where it's got color coded pie charts and things like that. It's just going to be laid out real stiff. And also in these notices that come in, sometimes they're 8, 12 pages long. And really, there's about a page worth of information that is really important. The rest of it is just what I call stuffing. And by that, what I mean is there's things about taxpayer rights and how to contact a taxpayer advocate. And all those are important. I don't mean to discount them, but that's information you can get right off the IRS website. What you really need to look at is usually the first and then sometimes the third and fourth page of these notices. That's particular to your situation, not just speaking generally.
Yeah. And speaking of notice, what about the notice number itself? How important is that? And can it tell someone about the issue the IRS is raising with them?
Absolutely. Not only does it tell them about the issue, but it also tells them at what point in the sequence of notices their situation is, because people will move as they do. And generally, the IRS does not forward letters. Rarely do you ever see a yellow sticker from the post office on an IRS letter. And that's really for security reasons and privacy reasons. So people move and they say, well, I hadn't gotten a notice and I didn't know about this for 2 years. And then I file a tax return, which has their current address on there. And the IRS is sending notices and they'll say, this is the first notice I got. And I'll say, well, let me see what it looks like. Send me a picture of it, scan it, or tell me the notice number. And I'll say, well, you're probably about a year and a half deep into this situation. And they say, well, they didn't know, but the notice number tells me not only really the type of tax situation they're facing, but really how far along in the progress of collections or examination it is.
And Brian, we've talked about this. I mentioned at the intro, don't throw the letter away. Sometimes people ignore these notices. They think the IRS, they made a mistake. The issue is going to go away. Why is that a bad idea?
Well, because those notices are oftentimes will lay out the timeframes you have to exercise certain rights to appeal, rights to review by manager, and even really a right to take some type of action short of having to go to court, usually tax court. And if you miss those deadlines, in some cases, your only option is tax court. And even then, sometimes you miss the tax court petition date. And from there, it's not necessarily an impossible situation. It's just a lot more time consuming all the way around. And it's a harder hill to climb when you've missed those deadlines.
Brian, we've talked about individuals, but let's move to business owners for a second, because the payroll tax notices, do those differ from the individual ones? And why do those often signal a little bit more urgency?
Well, they definitely can differ from an individual, but if you're a sole proprietor, you can be held directly responsible for the unpaid payroll tax. Usually, a lot faster situation than under a circumstance where somebody is, say, S corp or an LLC. The sense of urgency with payroll is that, going back to one of the things we've talked about previously, the bulk of the IRS collections come from payroll tax withholding, and so their system is set up to be really geared to move very quickly and very hard towards collection of payroll tax, because that is the vast majority of what they collect. So the time frames aren't necessarily shorter in there. It's just you want to respond to it more quickly than you might even for a personal tax debt, just because uh, certain options that you have to preserve rights, you want to move on them, because you don't want to wait till the IRS actually sends somebody out to your place of business.
Brian, I love asking you about client examples, obviously without giving specific details of the client, but can you talk about a time where maybe a taxpayer responded or didn't respond to an early notice and it completely changed the direction of their case?
Well, somebody had contacted me, and this was, gosh, probably about 10 years ago. It was an individual that was working a single W-2 job. I don't even recall what he was making. We'll just round it up. Say the guy was making $100,000 a year. And he got a letter saying, hey, we got your tax return and we processed it. Of course, this was a year and a half later, and that you left $100,000 off your tax return. Well, as soon as he got this letter, he reached out to me, and we moved quickly enough where we were able to basically put out this fire. Uh, I mean, in record time, at least as I recall, it was probably not even a week, and we got this straightened around. And ultimately, what had happened is the employer had accidentally reported his income twice to the IRS. So instead of it showing to the IRS he made 100,000, it looked like he made 100,000 with this company and another 100,000 with the company. And so by reaching out quickly like that, we were able to extinguish this. On the flip side, I could talk for a long time about people that ignored notices to the point where having to extricate them from that situation was near impossible. But in some cases, we were able to get it straightened around. Other cases, things had gone so far down the road, it was to a situation where you almost irreparable. But again, it's always about just taking a look at that notice and reaching out. Don't ignore it, because the IRS is sending that for a reason. Now, I will say this, because I'm in the business. I've seen people get notices that don't pertain to them. I've received notices on taxpayers that I don't represent. I don't know how in the world my name got put with it. So it does happen, but that's really pretty rare. But again, always just open it up and take a look at it.
So, Brian, staying on that, especially on the notice part, why does the IRS send multiple letters about the same issue? And does the progression of those letters usually signal anything?
Exactly, they do, and they do send multiple letters and multiple notices, because one of the things, again, I hear from people, and oftentimes it's because they've moved and not updated their address with the IRS, is they will say, this is the first letter that I ever got on this. And I'll say, from that notice number, that's about six deep into it. And yeah, they do go from, say, for instance, if it's a bill or even underreported income, you'll get the letter that says, hey, we think you made a mistake, or we think you owe this money. If you dispute it, let us know. But if you do, please pay it. And then the next letter says, hey, we already sent you a letter and you didn't respond. So you've got 30 days to respond. And then they send you a third letter that says, hey, we're kind of getting pissed at you. And it doesn't really say that, but that's the tone of it. That we're getting kind of frustrated with you. And about the fourth letter in, it says, look, we're going to seize or levy property if you don't respond or take care of the situation. And unfortunately, for a lot of people, it kind of takes getting to that point. And I think, like you said, I think people kind of maybe wish that it's going to go away, and it's not. I mean, it's the government, and their computers may be old, but I can tell you what, the mail still works with them, and they still love to send out those letters.
Yeah. So, Brian, now that person is bringing you a stack of these letters, right, of these notices. What are some of the first things that you look at to kind of understand how quickly the IRS could act?
Well, what's interesting is IRS letters rarely have a postmark on them. They're just that white blank envelope that says postage paid by, I don't know, the taxpayer, something like that. So you can't tell from the outside how old the notice is, usually. Now, again, that's getting into the weeds on some of that stuff. But what I'll do is I'll take the notices, and people usually kind of have them in the right order, but I can tell by looking at the first page at what point in the process it is, just by looking at the notice or letter number. And so I always start with the most recent and then kind of work backwards, because you want to find out if people did respond, because there are oftentimes people do respond, and they mean well, and they think that their response is going to be sufficient, and it's not, because with the IRS, they have certain ways that you must respond to their notices. A lot of times what people will do is they'll sit down and grab a notepad and a pen, and they'll write longhand, they'll write out a letter explanation. That might work if you're explaining it to another person, but when you're dealing with the IRS, oftentimes if that response is not attached to a particular form or notice response letter, it's ignored. It doesn't work. You have to respond in the form or fashion that the IRS requires. And that's one of the things. Obviously, we know how to do that. And for most people, they think writing a letter, and the letter may be completely legitimate. There may be a complete mix-up, but that's insufficient. So I ask people, bring any response that you've made to the IRS, bring that with you when we meet. Or obviously, if we're working with people virtually, which is probably more than half our clients now, you can just simply email it to us. But let me see what response you gave, because there's information in there that may be very valuable to help me help you.
So, Brian, as we put a bow on today's episode, someone's listening right now. They just opened up the letter. They don't understand it. What's the safest way to get clarity before the problem escalates?
Well, the first option or first course of action for them is to open the letter. And I do get people calling saying, I got all these letters and I'm afraid to open them. And I jokingly say the IRS quit putting rattlesnakes in the envelopes years ago. But look, if you don't really want to open the letters, and in some cases people will just mail them to me. And if they do that, that's pretty rare. But usually I say, just open it. Just let me see the first couple pages, okay? Because I can tell you the situation. And sometimes it's not as bad as they think. Other times it's worse. But believe me, you have to respond to these IRS notices, or you can find yourself in a situation where maybe you wish you did, and you don't want that to happen. And so the best thing is just reach out to our office, give us a call, and we'll talk with you and see what you have. And if it turns out it's a situation that's small or you can handle on your own, we'll tell you that. You don't always need to hire a tax attorney, but if you do, we're here.
Brian, thank you so much for the time and the insights. I truly appreciate it, as always.
Thank you, Mike.
And thank you to everyone out there for listening to this installment of the IRS Debt and Audit Podcast. If you want to learn more about Brian's work that he does over at Tampa Tax Relief, do me a favor right now. Visit tampataxrelief.com. Don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a review and comment, or share the episode with someone who needs to hear it. As always, I'm Mike Leon. See everybody next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.